A very good day. My name is Jeff Vrieling, and I'm a professional services engineer too at Jamf, based out of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Today, I'm going to be taking a journey with you guys together into the iPad that signs into a room once. As with all presentations, they all come about with a little bit of a backstory. So is mine. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the backstory, how this all came about. After that, what we'll be doing together is we're going to do a step-by-step configuration of everything that we'll be needing to do together in terms of to make this work in your environment. There's a couple of different elements that we need to go about and configure. So we need to make some configurations in Azure. We need to get our applications, our iOS apps ready for deployment. We need to set up the single sign-on extension or SSO extension. I might talk about these terms a little bit mixed up, but yeah, SSO or single sign-on is the same thing here. And then lastly, I'm going to show you the experience that it is that we're actually building and having a little bit of a conclusion. So to start off, every story has a beginning, and this one began with me as a professional services engineer working with one of our retail customers that operate well over 100 stores, and their stores, they come with a couple of different Apple devices. So they use iPod touches, they use iPads, and they use iPhones. They use them in various different roles. Some are used as point of sale devices, some are used as back office devices, and some are used as customer facing devices. The main worry that the customer presented me with, and the main task that they asked me to figure out a solution with, was the privacy aspect of a iPad that wasn't used in a back office manner. To explain a bit how they use them, well, they have store managers and regular employees signing into their tools and their web-based applications on a regular basis, and it happened more frequently that an employee, a store manager, forgot to sign out of the office application, whereas the next employee comes and the iPad was not yet reset, thus gaining unwanted access to the email of the said store manager. Now, that's obviously something that's not entirely desirable, so they asked me to look into that. That was the backstory, the short version of that, and as a conclusion, I came up with this setup of a combination of Jamf setup, Azure, and the single sign-on extension, and closing then off with the Jamf reset application at the end of the shift. So the objective here was very simple. It's to get multiple users to use an iPad in a safe way, and taking into account the privacy concerns that come along with that. So for that, we're gonna first start with the configuration and setup of Jamf setup with Azure. And for that, we're gonna have a look at the Azure bits first. So if we're gonna look at the Azure bit, I'm gonna assume that you already have some form of Azure account, an Azure admin account. If you do not have an Azure admin account or are completely unfamiliar with Microsoft Azure, at this point in time, it's good to fetch that colleague who does this more frequent than yourself, and just make them sign into this. If you do have an Azure admin account, this is the time where you should sign in to the portal.azure.com and go ahead and log into your Azure Active Directory. On the left-hand side, we'll see something called app registrations, and that's the thing that we're going to go for. And we're going to go ahead and create a new app registration. If we're going to look at how that looks in the next window, once we clicked on the plus, we now have the opportunity to go ahead and give this application a name. And with any Azure application that you tend to create, for whatever reason that might be, my advice is to keep it simple and keep it targeted, because you're going to usually end up with a whole lot of them, especially if we're going to look at some other Jamf tooling, which is outside of what we're going to talk about today, but you're going to end up with a lot of Jamf apps. So advice here is just keep it simple. So we're going to give this thing a name, and we're going to leave the who can sign in bit to default. We don't need to add anything. What we do need to add is the redirection URL. So in the redirection URL, we need to select public client slash native. And we need to add a URL. The URL is displayed here on the screen. With this session comes also some session handouts that I'll be referring to from time and time again. So if you see a lot of things that you're going to copy, and we're going to go through a fair bit of them, it's wise to have a look at the session handout documentation and follow the links or follow the session handout stuff from there. So you can easily copy it over. Anyway, so once we've done that, we can go ahead and save it. We're not quite done yet with this particular application. So one thing that we need to do is we need to grant the admin consent. And on the left-hand side, we need to go ahead and do API permissions. And then on the right-hand side of this window, we can select grant admin consent. That will result in a nice green box under the user.read privileges you see at the bottom of this screen. If you do not have these privileges to grant admin consent, it's not too much of a biggie. You can contact your colleague who has that ability to fix that for you, and they'll be able to do that nicely on your behalf. The next step is we need to actually make sure that we can talk to this app from the internet. We'll do this by making the app public facing, and we'll allow public client flows. So what we're going to do on the left hand side is we're going to go ahead and we're going to click to authentication. Once we did that, we're going to go to the advanced setting bit and click on the yes button. Don't forget to click the save button. And that is really almost it for now. We're going to circle back to this. So for the next step, I'm going to suggest you open up a new tab in your favorite browser, and you're going to go with this. Again, leave it open because we're going to circle back to this in a second. So that was generally the Azure bits and bobs that we needed to do. Relatively doable, not too technically crazy. But once we've got this thing sorted, we need to have a look at the applications that we're going to need to deploy within Jamf Pro. So the app deployment starts in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. Doesn't really matter which one of the two you use. For this example, I stuck with Apple Business Manager, but the two are interchangeable for this step that we're going to do today. So we're going to need to be buying the licenses, because for this to work, we need to deploy the app with Jamf Pro to our target iOS device. And we need to do this in a way called managed distribution. So for managed distribution means that we also assign it a license, and for anything that we distribute via Jamf Pro, we need to make sure we have plenty of them. So my advice would be in this particular scenario that if you're going to think about deploying this at about 100 iPads, you buy about 150 or 200 licenses. All of the apps that we're going to talk about today are free, so they don't cost money, and all you have to do is basically assure that they are assigned to the correct token. So once they're assigned to the correct token, and they will automatically sync to Jamf Pro, and it takes a few minutes. So we start off with Microsoft Authenticator. We buy some licenses and assign them to our token. Once we've done Business Manager, we're going to do exactly the same process, but then for the Jamf Setup app. So for Jamf Setup also, we're going to buy plenty of licenses, and following the Jamf Reset app, again, also here, the same equal amount of licenses, because for this exercise, we're going to deploy all three applications to our test fleet of devices. So again, Microsoft Authenticator, Jamf Setup, Jamf Reset. So after a little bit of time, the apps will automatically appear in the Jamf Pro console. Within the Jamf Pro console, we'll be able to find them under the mobile devices section. So once the application appeared, usually takes about 2 to 3 minutes. We can then go ahead and start preparing the deployment for the application. In this case, I'm going to start off with the Microsoft Authenticator app. You can go ahead and click on the Microsoft Authenticator app. And there's a couple of things that we need to do in order for us to get this ready to a state where we can actually go ahead and deploy this. The first, we're going to assign this into a category. It is an optional step. I highly recommend you do. It not only keeps your Jamf Pro interface nicely organized, but it also makes sure that the applications are nicely sorted, and then again we don't get confused there in the Jamf Pro console. Second, we're gonna select a distribution method. For this examples that we're gonna work on today, it's probably advisable to do it automatically. Then we're gonna need to scroll down a little bit, and once we scroll down, we have some more options available. One of the key options that we're gonna have to select are the auto update settings. The auto update settings can be found under the application, and they consist essentially of two checkboxes. The first checkbox is for Jamf Pro to talk to the App Store, and it's going to check with the App Store at a set time. In this example, it's 1 a.m. in the morning. And it's going to check with the App Store if there's a new update available. So it's going to say, hey, App Store, is there an update available? If there is, Jamf Pro will update the entry that you'll see in the Jamf Pro console. That's the entry that we're editing right now. So it's going to update the version number. That by itself doesn't necessarily forcefully update the apps. For that, we have the second button available where we are updating the actual applications. So my advice is to keep your apps always up to date. And in this particular case, go ahead and select both options. If you have made a previous setting configured in the devices section of the settings where you do this on a global level, so would do this for all applications, this will mean that these two options that we're talking about right now are grayed out. So there's no stress if they are grayed out. That means that it's already configured to go for all apps. And from there on, we're pretty much done with the actual configuration of the general settings, and we're going to continue to the scope. And one thing to note, again, this is pretty much for everything that we do, we save at the end. So there's no need of saving in the middle of our app deployment, but we save all the way at the end once we're done with it. So we're going to go ahead and click on the scope. And with scope, we decide to go ahead and distribute this app to the devices that need to actually get it. And this is where we would configure that. And again, within the Jamf Pro interface, we focus on the devices only. We don't really do anything with the users section. For this example, I've actually went ahead and scoped this only to my test devices, but you can actually go ahead and scope this to a smart or static group, or even a bulk of devices if that's something that you want to do. Anyway, once you've defined your scope, we go ahead and go over to the next tab, which is the Manage Distribution tab. And what we do with Manage Distribution is actually very, very important. We need to tick the box. And once the box is ticked, it's this one, we go ahead and grant that particular device one of our licenses. That means that if this application gets deployed, it will do it automatically. So it won't prompt the user to buy any licenses with his or her Apple ID individually, but we will do it there from the licenses that we previously bought. That's all we got to do. If you have multiple Apple School or Apple Business Manager instances, all you have to do is make sure to select the right one from the drop-down menu below. To make sure that there's enough licenses. And again, I can't hammer this enough because it's something that we see a lot, unfortunately, is that licenses get depleted, especially with free apps. It's not something that's needed. But yeah, just keep an eye out on your license count and make sure if you see that you're running low, you go ahead and actually buy some more licenses for your iPads or for your devices to deploy. All right, then we're going to go over to the next section. That's going to be a very exciting one. It's the App Configuration tab. So what we do with the Application Configuration tab or App Config tab is we're going to inform the application what it needs to do. So we send essentially a little bit of pre-configuration to the application. And in this particular scenario, there's just a little bit of a config that we need to do. It's just one dictionary with a key in there. And this key essentially puts that device into shared device mode. And again, you can grab this key from the documentation or from the session handout key as you wish. And then you can paste it right here in the app config bit. It will scale with you, so that's a very easy thing to do. And once you're done, we can go ahead and save it. That brings us back to that previous tab from Azure that I spoke about to keep open. And the reason why we need to circle back to this is we need some more data from this particular app registration. So if you missed this from the first tab, you need to go back into your Azure console into the app registration. Otherwise, you need to click on Overview at the top left. And we need to copy over two things. We need to copy the application client ID, or app ID, and we need to copy over the directory ID or the tenant ID. Either way, we need both bits of information, so go ahead and paste that into a little bit of a text editor, and yeah, we're going to use that in just 1 second. Because most likely in that text editor, you're going to have a lot more app config available, because what you see here in the screenshot is a lot of the customization that we can do for the Jamf setup app. So in this particular scenario, we just finished with the Microsoft Authenticator app. We made sure that that works like a charm. And now we need to get Jamf setup ready. So same thing here. I'm going to assume that you worked with me here and already purchased the licenses, and they're visible under the mobile device app section. Now you're going to go to Jamf setup, go through the distribution method, update settings, the scope, the manage distribution, and here we are then at the configuration bits. Jamf setup offers quite a fair bit of customization in terms of text, in terms of button color, in terms of logos, and you can really make this all into your own. And that is really beautiful, because if your company like Jamf has a style which is more bluish, has a lot of blue in their logo, you can make Jamf setup look blue, so you're not stuck with the green, for instance. But again, you can customize this in the app config that you push and publish with the particular application. However, the reason why we're here is to specifically talk about the single sign-on extension. And for that, we need to edit two keys. And the keys that we need to edit are located right around the middle, just below the middle section. And there's two things that we gotta paste in there. First of all, the application registration, the app ID, the application registration ID, you'll need to paste that under the com.jamf.config.sso.client ID, or the first one. The second one is the tenant ID. You would need to paste that behind the slash in the login.microsoftonline.com field with a / followed by your tenant ID. So you can see in the screenshot how it's supposed to roughly look. And then we're almost there, so don't save just yet. There's just a small bit of thing that we got to do, and we have to actually go ahead and set up an extension attribute. And we haven't done this yet in the prep. So what I want you to do is just go ahead and click right on the Managed Settings option at the bottom left and open that in a new tab. That will bring you to here, the device management settings in the Jamf Pro settings, and we're going to then hover over to the extension attributes section. Under the device management, of course. What we're going to do then is we're going to give this one a name, and whatever name you give it, just make sure you copy it, because we need this back in our app config. The description, you can put a description in there as you wish. The data type will be string, because we're going to work with a word. And the page at which it will be displayed can be extension attribute. And the tech input type is going to be text field for this exercise. So what this is used for is to report back to Jamf the role which the end user will select. So within the end user selection, within the end user login process, they have the opportunity of selecting a role. If there are multiple roles defined, the user will get a prompt. If there's one role defined, and that role is also noted in the Azure integration, which is something that goes beyond what we talk here about today, the role will be selected automatically. But in this particular scenario, we're going to assume that the end user has the ability to select his or her role from a list of roles that we specify in the app config. And this extension attribute is an inventory attribute in Jamf Pro, where it will receive that information back from the device. And then you can work with smart groups to look for that particular role and then scope or exclude that particular role from certain profiles or apps. So once you've saved your configuration, you can go back to the app config for Jamf setup and note it down. The same thing goes for Jamf reset here. It's pretty much an identical configuration in terms of the Azure bits. The rest of the stuff is somewhat, you need to modify that to your liking. But again, what we need to put in the Jamf reset app, again, for Jamf reset, it's the same process as for the Microsoft Authenticator. And for the setup app, I'm going to assume that you bought the licenses, went through the update, the distribution settings, the scope, the manage distribution, and then we get here. Again, this template, you can find it in the Jamf documentation or in the session handout. So what it is that we need to do? Well, we need to first go ahead and put in the Azure bits. It's the same stuff that we did for Jamf setup. So we need to note down the client ID, and we need to put the tenant ID behind the login.microsoftonline.com. And then at the final bit here as well, we note down the extension attribute bits. So that's really it for the applications. Just a quick summary of what we've been doing so far. Then we're going to continue onwards to the SSO extension. So we bought the licenses, we scoped the app, we used the Azure application that we created in the previous section. We copied the app ID and client ID from there, and we made an extension attribute together and noted all of that down in the application configuration for the respectable apps that we're deploying. So that brings us on to the next bit of configuration that we need to do. And this is again a configuration bit with a lot of stuff that we can copy to and from. And my advice is just look at the session handout stuff and copy it from there. That's the SSO extension. So if we're going to look at the requirements, so they come straight from Microsoft in this particular case. So we need an iOS device that runs iOS 13 or later. That's the actual only requirement, and has the Microsoft Authenticator app deployed. And I promised that we would circle back to this requirement earlier on. So the Microsoft Authenticator app actually has a little bit of logic built into it, and that uses partly in the background a lot of the magic that is leveraged to obtain the token for the end user, with which the end user is then signed in automatically into applications that support it. It's not necessarily just the Microsoft application, but if an application supports the SSO extension and can leverage that token, it can then use that as well. So that's the requirements. So how do we configure it? Well, we start by going to devices and going to configuration profiles and create a brand new one. Once we configured a brand new one, we have to fill out some stuff here in the general pane. Naming, we have to give it a name. And again, I noticed I know that in the previous slide, my configuration section was entirely empty. That's because I'm doing this on a test instance. I highly advise you to do the same. But I also realized that your Jamf Pro instance may not look as clean as mine. So my advice in this case is just give it a name that makes sense for this particular profile. Then we're going to look into category. Well, we already spoke about that. Highly advisable to do the same for the same reason. And the level at which we're going to deploy this is going to be device level. And when we look at the deployment method, we're going to make this deploy automatically. So then we're going to have to scroll down the payloads, and we're going to go to one that is called the single sign-on extension. We have to configure a fair bit of text here. Again, my advice is look at the session handout document that contains links to our product documentation and Microsoft's product documentation, so you can copy the stuff from there. So what do we need to configure? Well, the first thing that we need to configure is the first bit is the profile identifier. So the profile identifier, or extension identifier, I must say, is in this case com.microsoft.azure-authenticator.sso extension. I know it's a lot of text, you can forget about it because most people just copy and paste it anyway. The team ID will stay empty, and the second type will be the second bullet point that we would see on our screen. That's it for this section. We need to scroll down now because we're going to have to note down a lot of URLs. Microsoft has quite a lot of URLs. And again, you can copy them over straight from the session handout documentation. And yeah, just note down each and every individual profile that you see right here on the right side. And again, we can click on the plus for quite a fair bit. That brings us to the last bit of configuration. That's the bottom end of this profile, where we would need to upload a custom plist, a custom property list with a little bit of configuration. And the easiest way how you can make this is just open up the terminal on your Mac and copy the two commands that you see here towards the bottom of this slide. It's a default write command that will set the correct value, and then there's a plist util convert. It's going to make sure that this is in the right format. So if you just run these two commands in your terminal, you'll find a plist file on your desktop. You can upload that in the previous window, in Jamf Pro for the configuration profile. You can then scope this to the exact same devices that you scope the applications to, and then you're pretty much good to go. And that's really it. So a lot of configuration there, especially on the SSO bit, but once you're done and you've scoped this correctly, it should go through pretty smoothly. Let's finally have a look at the end user experience. How does this look like? Well, I'm going to start with Jamf setup. And again, the starting point for this demo is that we're just having the 4 apps deployed. So we have Jamf setup, Jamf reset, Microsoft Authenticator, and we're going to have Outlook and Safari, all of them ready to go. There's a profile deployed to this particular iPad that hides all the rest of the apps. Again, you can work with smart groups depending on the role selection, on what somebody selects. That's being written back to Jamf Pro to that extension attribute that we spoke about earlier to exclude some of that profiles if that's something that you want to do. Anyway, let's have a quick look at this, how this goes. The end user starts up Jamf setup. They are being greeted by the Microsoft sign-in window. The end user signs into that particular window. They are being greeted for that password. And at this stage, if this is an account that has never signed into the Microsoft services before, they are also being prompted to change their password and make this into something personal. Again, all within the confines of this nice window that we have within Jamf setup. And again, if there's a requirement for 2FA or Microsoft Authenticator app on the employee's personal device, this is also something that we could set up in this particular window, because the end user is just being guided through the initial setup process, and I'm doing this with a brand new account. Finally, the user selects the role. For this particular exercise, I selected front office, and that's really it from a setup perspective. So that role is being then written back to Jamf Pro, put in the extension attribute, and then whatever is applicable to front office will then be deployed to this particular device. So that's the end user experience for setup. I want to go now and run the end user experience for the SSO extension. So because we signed in, we have a token. We can see that very clearly in setup in the previous slide where we have the username noted. So we have a token. So what I'm going to do here in this quick demo is I'm going to open up Safari, because Safari is one of the things that actually supports the SSO extension. And from there on, I'm going to, if I can type correctly, I'm going to go to the office.com website. And what you'll see here in the office.com website is you see a sign in button, and that's what I'm going to click on because I want to sign into office.com. And it's going to look at my device, it's going to recognize if I have a token, and as a result of that, it's going to sign me into the office.com website, granting me all the applications that this particular user has rights to. For instance, Outlook web access, if that's something that you have granted your users. All right, and then when the shift is done, finally, the user needs to sign out so the token can be cleared. And that's being done here in the Jamf Reset app. So normally within Jamf Reset, we have the ability to perform a hard reset, which means the iPad will be wiped and somebody would need to go through the whole setup process again. But we can do a soft reset with Jamf Reset as well. It's just a simple sign out, and that will clear the tokens. That will make sure the iPad is ready for the next user. So that's the end user experience of Jamf Setup, Jamf Reset, and the Safari. There's one more thing. I have made this presentation. By the time you guys see this, it will be late September. This presentation was created in the midst of May of this year, and at this moment of creation, end of May, beginning of June, this feature that we have seen till now was still in preview. So maybe at the time that you're watching this is moot information. In that case, you can actually ignore this bit. But what does this mean that the app is in a preview? That means that not everything works as it should. So within the demo, you saw the end user just simply using the SSO extension being signed into Outlook. What you haven't seen is that you need, in order for this to work and put that device in Microsoft share mode, so make Microsoft recognize these devices in share mode, and global admin needs to actually sign into this device in the Microsoft Azure Authenticator app and put this device in share mode. This is only something that needs to be done once. So if you test this into your environments, just keep that into mind and just bear that in mind for testing those workflows. Also, at this moment of creation of the presentation, Safari is one of the very few apps that still recognizes the Microsoft token. So bear that in mind as a one more thing when you go through your testing of workflow and see how this can help your organization be great. And again, this presentation was made quite a bit way before JNUC, so I do wanted to make note of that. Other than that, I wish you very much happy testing with this, and I want to thank you so much for listening.